This quick exchange rate presentation is on fixed and managed exchange rates. Fixed exchange rates are exchange rates that are determined by the government. Revaluation is when the government will purposefully increase the value of a currency in terms of another, and devaluation is when the government purposefully decreases the value of a currency in terms of another. But in general, a fixed exchange rate will not change. That's the whole point. The government purposefully keeps a usually low exchange rate because they want to keep their goods competitive on the foreign market. They might keep a higher exchange rate because they want to remain competitive internationally. But for whatever purpose, governments will keep their exchange rate set, and then only at times will purposefully increase or decrease the value. And for those times, we don't use the term appreciation or depreciation, we use revaluation or devaluation. So here's an exchange rate diagram for yuan in terms of euro. It will help us to illustrate the concept. Let's first look at an instance where Chinese people are buying more foreign products. If Chinese people buy more foreign products, then naturally the supply of yuan will increase. There's the increase in the supply of yuan. And as more yuan come onto the forex market, the foreign exchange market, you can see that the exchange rate would depreciate if it was a floating exchange rate. Look from P to P1. See the depreciation in the exchange rate? Well, if this is fixed exchange, China does not want that to happen. How does China prevent it? They will look for a way to increase the demand for yuan from foreign country, in this case the United States. Well, how can they do that? They could sell Chinese assets like Chinese bonds to make it so Americans want to buy those Chinese bonds, and to do that they need yuan. They could sell U.S. currency, and by selling U.S. currency, then as they exchange it, demand for yuan will change on the other hand. They could also increase their base interest rates to make it more appealing for Americans to save in Chinese banks. And by doing any of those, or a combination of any of them, they could increase the demand for their currency and return the exchange rate to P, the initial exchange rate. So again, here's the market in equilibrium. Chinese buy more foreign products. That would lead to depreciation as more yuan go on the market. But they don't want depreciation. They want a fixed exchange rate. They want to keep the exchange rate at P. So they do any of those things I just mentioned to increase the demand for their currency, which will keep the exchange rate at P. Thus a fixed exchange rate. Let's look at another example here, and this is a much more practical example. Let's say foreigners want more Chinese products because they're mass produced in high quantities and that price is pretty low to begin with for the Chinese products. As foreigners buy more and more Chinese products, they need yuan. So what happens to demand for Chinese yuan? It increases, and there you can see this rightward shift that would lead to upward pressure on the currency. Notice that the exchange rate wants to go from P to P1. That would be appreciation. But a fixed exchange rate does not allow for that. A fixed exchange rate aims to keep the exchange rate at P, the initial exchange rate. How is that achieved? Well, China will increase the supply of yuan coming from their country. How does China do that? They could buy up American bonds or American currency, and in this case put more yuan out into the market as they buy these foreign goods or foreign currencies. So that's a very real example of what China does in order to keep their exchange rate low, fixed at whatever rate they would like. It's not easy to maintain a fixed exchange rate. You need to maintain a large amount of reserves, especially in that first example. In examples where you want to boost the demand for your currency, in order to do that, you have to sell something in order to increase demand for your currency. And so you might sell your foreign reserves, or you might sell your bonds. But at some point, those can become depleted, so or harder to sell. That would be a challenge. There's also no automatic adjustment to global market shocks, meaning that a floating exchange rate will naturally experience change because the global market is strong or weak, while a fixed exchange rate is by its nature fixed. So there might be external problems, external stability problems, as the rest of the world's rates are adjusting and your rate does not. And the big one is really political tension, and this is a good example using China and America for a long time, and even still, American politicians will say China cheats, and they mean that China is keeping their currency artificially low to keep making their goods competitive. The problem with doing that is as China keeps their goods competitive, all other goods remain not competitive because they can't compete against the low-priced Chinese goods. The last thing to look at is a managed exchange rate. This is a floating exchange rate that the government typically will interfere with only in rare circumstances, and it's to maintain stability. So the government will allow their exchange rate to float, but if it appreciates or depreciates too quickly, perhaps within a certain band, then the government will act by selling bonds, selling currency, buying bonds, buying currency, or manipulating the base interest rate. Which, of course, when you heard that before, you may have thought, isn't that monetary policy? And it is. Base interest rate can affect both the domestic economy, but the exchange rate as well. So, fixed exchange rates, a lot going on there, a lot of different factors to consider, but an important aspect of international economics.